Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ohio Policy Talk. I'm your host, Anastasia, and today we're talking about an issue that has been showing up in a lot of inboxes, mailboxes, and conversations all across Ohio, and that is real estate wholesaling. If you follow our advocacy efforts online, you may already know that 2025 was such a significant year for us in addressing the issue of wholesaling. Through our advocacy work at the State House, we were able to get the state's first ever wholesaling regulation into law to protect Ohio homeowners. So while regulation is super important, we're now onto educating our realtor members and Ohio homeowners so that they know about this law and how to protect themselves. And what better way to do this than hearing directly from a real estate professional who has been on the front lines of this issue? So with no further ado, our special guest today is Oliver Chapman, a boots-on-the-ground realtor who is going to give us the inside scoop on wholesalers to help all of you listeners out there be informed on what's going on and what you should be watching out for. So Oliver, welcome to the show.
Hey, Anastasia, really appreciate you having me on today, and I'm excited to talk about a lot. There's a lot that I can unpack here, just to basically warn the public a little bit about this. It's a whole industry. I don't think many people understand it. They might have heard the term wholesaling, but from my walks and where I practice, most people have no idea what it is, and I just want to help people how to navigate the space in case they find themselves in this situation.
Yep, absolutely. And to start off, can you just kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and share kind of what got you so interested in consumer advocacy on the wholesaling front?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been licensed 13 years, and I work a lot of just traditional real estate help, first-time home buyers and sellers, and but I do work with a lot of investors. And when I'm working with investors, the best investment deals sometimes is sourcing off-market properties, and it's all about your networking skills. And so what I do is I join a lot of investment networks that are on Facebook. There's a lot of Facebook groups out there that are dedicated to investors, and we share ideas, we share inventory, and there's just a lot of information that we seek on there. And over the past couple of years, I've always seen a recurring theme on these Facebook groups about these contracts or contracts for assignment. And I started doing a little bit of a deeper dive of what these contracts were, who were doing them, and the term wholesaling. And I was pretty shocked. The deeper I went into this industry, it gets very dark. And I'll share more about that as we discuss. But that's kind of how I stumbled across what wholesaling was.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, when I started doing my own research on what wholesaling was, I kind of Googled it. And the first, 5 pages of Google is just, how to be a wholesaler. It's not really giving you many details on, what actually happens and, how often it occurs in the state. I couldn't really find much data on that. But when people hear the term real estate wholesaling, what do they think it usually means, and how does that compare to what you're actually seeing on the ground?
Sure. So most people really have no idea. When I talk to people about wholesaling, and I just ask them, I said, do you know what wholesaling is? And at first they're like, they don't want to look stupid. So they said, well, yeah. But then they kind of tell in the inflection of their voice, they don't. And then they're like, well, just, let me know what it's about. And so I would say almost 9 out of 10 people really have no idea what it is. So most people just don't really know what it is.
Yeah. And I know you have a ton of stories and, there's this, like you said, there's this gap in perception versus reality of, what is wholesaling. And a lot of people are surprised when, at the closing table, it's someone else that's buying their house. And it's because of tactics that wholesalers are usually using that are quite misleading. And when you've shared that you have a couple of stories of, homeowners getting misled by wholesalers, based on what you've seen, what are kind of common tactics and red flags that show that a seller might be dealing with a wholesaler? And
Sure thing.
can you share some of those stories?
Yeah, so here's what goes on. I think most people, when we talk about like, what is wholesaling, I always ask them. I said, "Do you ever see those billboards or signs on the road that says we buy houses?" And of course, everybody has seen them. And we also get a lot of text messages and spam phone calls from people, asking to buy your house. And we'll buy it cash, and we can close quick. So anytime you start hearing that kind of language, you're most likely dealing with the wholesaler. And the part that's really misleading, they're not actually they themselves buying your home. What they are doing is they're buying the rights to a contract to buy your home. And then what they internally do is they start marketing what's called an assignment. They start marketing that contract to other third parties, and they market it at a higher price than what you're in contract for, to sell your house for. And sometimes what will happen, just some red flags that you'll start to notice immediately is they're pretty aggressive. So what they're going to do is they're going to come over and they're going to take a whole bunch of pictures of your home, and they're going to aggressively negotiate your contract down to, because what they want to do is be able to assign it for a higher price. So they need to get the lowest price possible on your home. And then they need a whole lot of access to your home, because again, they have to start selling your house to somebody else, and most people are not going to buy it sight unseen. So they need to figure out clever tactics of how to get other investors into the home. And I call these soft open houses. But if they start asking you for your keys, that's a red flag. You own the home. You should never give your keys to a complete stranger, even though you have a contract with them, because they want to put a lockbox. And what they're going to tell you is we need to have our contractors come to the home. We need to have our inspectors come to the home. We need to have an appraiser come to the home. But what's really misleading is these are not contractors, inspectors, or appraisers. They're marketing your home for sale, and they're coaching these other investors when they come in to act like they're a contractor or act like they're an appraiser or an inspector. And so really quickly, you can start to see this is not very traditional process. And the timelines start becoming really vague. So again, if you want to sell your home quick, they might tell you, oh, we can close in 2 weeks or we can close in 30 days. And then right when you get closer to closing, something's going to happen. They haven't assigned your contract yet. And they're going to call you, Anastasia, and they say, well, we need more time. Well, why do you need more time? Well, there's some funny lies they give, like, well, due to inflation, we couldn't, the cost of materials has gone up. So we're having to relook at our numbers. And again, these are just not normal things that, you would expect to hear. But the whole time behind the scenes, they're still marketing your home and trying to find another buyer to buy the rights to your contract. And they're making, a fee. And typically a fee is anywhere from $10,000 to about $20,000.
Wow. And they're walking kind of a fine line with, marketing the property, because that's something that only, licensed real estate agents can do. How many would you say kind of incidents of wholesaling have you kind of come across?
Oh, hundreds,
Yeah.
hundreds. What I typically do is, when I call sellers who are usually under assignment for these contracts. And I just let them know that, I asked them do you know what wholesaling is? I said, I saw you're in contract with an investor, and they have no idea. They literally have no idea. And they get pretty scared. I said, listen, it's not a scam. I said, you do have a valid contract. Somebody is trying to buy your home, but I said, it's not the way that you think. And so I start going through kind of step by step with them, how they got contacted, what their motivation was for selling the home. And I just let them know you have a lot more options at your disposal than what you think you actually have. And so, no, we can't break their contracts right now. And that's what we'll get into with your, Senate Bill 155. And there's going to be ways for people now to be able to expeditiously get out of their contract, which is great. But in the meantime, they do have rights, and they don't have to let these people in at any time that they say that they want to get in. I mean, there's these contracts, though, are very, very vague. And that's some of the problems that we run into, because they don't know what their rights are.
Wow. And it gets really difficult, if someone bought their home, 20 years ago for, let's say, $200,000, they might not know the true value of their home now. And then they have someone coming to their house saying, hey, I'll buy it for, $350,000. Maybe at this point, the house is probably worth, 400 or 500, but they end up missing out on their equity. So
They really
it's
do.
really dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, they're giving away a lot of their equity. And the problem is most of these homes, I mean, A lot of them just have a lot of deferred maintenance. So there are people who sometimes think, well, my home can't be worth that much because, we have a lot of deferred maintenance. It needs a new roof. It has, a lot of, it has some foundation issues, or it's a whole mess, or maybe it's an inherited property and the heirs live out of state and they just don't really know. They don't really want to go through the whole hassle of listing a home and putting it in the market because they're just not confident that there is a market for their home. But what they don't know is there's always a market for your home. Investors love homes that have deferred maintenance. And so if you can leverage more investors, you're going to get a better price. But what wholesalers do is, again, their job is to get it down to, they will try to find what your lowest price is, and then lock it up in contract. And then they know the true value of your home. And that's where they go and sell it for much higher.
Wow. And that is not fair. And I know that you mentioned we've talked about this new law that's going to be in effect in March, Senate Bill 155. And what it's going to do, it's going to add disclosure requirements and consumer protections around wholesaling. So specifically for our listeners, it requires wholesalers to clearly identify themselves, explain their role in the transaction, and just make sure that consumers and homeowners understand their rights before they enter into that contract. And this law was something that was years in the making. We were hearing stories similar to yours from all over the state. I know you mentioned, people coming in, pretending like they're inspectors or contractors. That's something we've heard from several other people. And from your experience, how is this going to help sellers and homeowners? And what role do you see kind of realtors playing under these new rules?
That's a really good question. So the first thing is just disclosure. It's going to require a wholesaler to so there's a whole separate disclosure page that's separate from the contract, because we all know contracts are long. There's a lot of words and clauses in there. People don't necessarily read all of that. They're just more looking at the price and the timeline of when they close. But on this whole separate disclosure, it will state right up front that they are wholesalers and they will be trying to maybe purchase the home, less than maybe what market value is. It also guides people to contact an attorney, so they know that they have rights to maybe run this by an attorney, see if this is a good, valid contract for them to be entering. But there's a very high standard of disclosure. And where realtors come in is, we're licensed for a reason. We have a code of ethics. So there's a lot of disclosures that we need to help people. And our job is to protect the public. And the public really is not protected by someone who is unlicensed. So if you want to sell your home and you want to know all of your options, you need to talk to somebody who's actually a fiduciary. And that's where a realtor comes in. We are fiduciaries. Now, we're only a fiduciary once we have enter what's called agency. But again, at least we have to give you what's called a consumer guide to agency. And we explain how our fiduciary responsibilities are there to protect them as both a buyer and a seller. But right now, wholesalers there is no governing body to police them. And so there's a lot of shady practices that really people get caught up in and people really get hurt. I've heard some really awful stories this past year, and I don't have time to go through all of them today, but some of these are just some of the worst stories you can imagine really? As a seller.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, to your point, homeowners definitely need that education and guidance to truly protect themselves because they don't know who's knocking at their door. They are kind of, imitating, a licensed agent almost. And again, that's kind of that value that realtors can bring in these cases. So that's why it's so important for us to kind of spread the word and say, hey, in March, Senate Bill 155 will be effective. So these wholesalers have to disclose their intentions before entering into that contract.
Well, Anastasia, funny you bring that up. They sometimes pretend to be realtors, and I actually have this on video. Last month, we talked to a seller and, explained to her that, yes, she was in a wholesale and assignment contract. And, we let her know if something doesn't feel right or if you need help with this, to call us and let us know what's going on. And she said, they're supposed to have this inspection. And she said, do you mind just going over? I have a tenant in the property. And she's like, the other side's vacant. And she goes, I just don't really feel comfortable. They've been really aggressive with my tenant about getting access. And I said, no problem. I said, I'll go over and see, make sure that their inspection goes well. Well, me knowing what inspection means, I just know that this is a public walkthrough. So as soon as I show up to the property, there's 10 people standing in the driveway, all waiting to go into this house. And what I got word was the tenant was really scared seeing all of these people standing outside. And it's like, why are all these people here for this inspection? So when I walk up, they asked me, he said, "Hey, are you here for the walkthrough?" I said, "Yes, I am." And I was recording this, and he said, "We have a problem. We can't get in unless we have a realtor." Because what the seller told them was a realtor would be coming by, her realtor, just to make sure that the inspection goes, to plan, and nobody else was allowed in home but an inspector or the company of the wholesaler. And he goes, "Well, can you pretend to be a realtor for us? So, because this tenant will not let us in unless you could."
Oh
And
my
he said,
gosh.
"If you don't want to be a realtor, maybe one of my guys, but one of us needs to act as a realtor." And I
That
was
is
like,
so
"Oh,
shady.
it's so shady."
Oh my
And
gosh.
that's when I told him, I said, "Well, I am the realtor." And he turned ghost white. He's like, "Oh, okay." And he was just caught red-handed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
How are they marketing this property?
So what they do is it's called a disposition list. On these investor forums, there's all kinds of cash buyers out there, and they're letting the cash buyers know that they have contracts for assignment, and if they would like to get access to these off-market properties, to provide their information, and they send out what's called a disposition email. And so all of the cash buyers will get an email of the inventory the wholesalers have that are for contracts that are up for assignment. And so therefore, and sometimes they have whole spreadsheets. You can see all the properties that they have under assignment at the time. And then investors can, pick and choose which ones they want to see photos of or go do a walkthrough. But yeah, it's a whole network that exists out there of these cash buyers.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they depend heavily on, the person in the house, the homeowner, the tenant, whoever, just
Mhm.
not knowing what they're getting into. So our hope is that come March, they will be aware. And at that point, it's like a buyer beware situation, if you
That's correct.
want to go through with it, because sometimes maybe you do want to really get out of this house
Oh
and
yeah.
you don't care how much you're getting out of it. You need to leave, or maybe it's too much
Well,
money
that's what
to
I've learned.
bear.
Most people, it's not sometimes about the money. They know that they're probably not getting the most money for their house. It's really about time and convenience. And so there is, I mean, wholesalers. There's ethical ones out there. I've talked with them. There's some that are actually they are very ethical, and it does serve a purpose. If you need time and convenience over money, then a wholesaler might be a good option for you. But if it's money or if it's just safety, then you really need to talk with a realtor or a legal expert and just learn about what all your options are. Because again, the wholesalers' contracts that they give you, those were prepared by their attorneys. So it protects the wholesaler. It does not protect you, the seller. So again, so a lot of the language in there, it favors the wholesaler, but not necessarily the seller. And that's where people can get really hurt.
Yeah. And we've even heard of some wholesalers getting into like a power of attorney situation as well. Is that something you've seen?
Well, yeah. So another thing that they can do is they can put a cloud on your title of your property. So what happens is once they enter a contract with you to buy your home, they will file with the recorder's office an affidavit that states that they have rights to buy your home. And even if they don't buy it, let's just say the contract falls through, because a lot of times they don't perform, they can't assign the contract, and then they just walk away and you're left holding the bag. And now you have to find another means to sell your house. Well, when you go to sell your home, there's this cloud that's on the title, and you are not actually, no title company is actually able to issue title insurance, which is going to be required to get your home sold. And because there's this cloud, and the wholesaler will not release the cloud on that title. And now you're really stuck. And
Oh,
those
wow.
are some of the worst cases that we see. And I talk with my title agency, and they say at least once or twice a month when they're doing a title search, they're finding these clouds on title.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, wow. That's incredible. Well, it sounds like you're kind of doing a lot of, your own work, finding these people and informing the home sellers and the homeowners. So honestly, like, thank you for that. That's amazing.
Well, you guys did all the heavy lifting, and I just want the public to know that the legislation that you guys got approved is going to help so many people. And I hope we find ways to be able to police this, because I don't think it's, unfortunately, a lot of wholesalers are still going to do the proper disclosures. But the more that we can make the rights public, or make, let people know their rights to the public, they'll soon learn that, yes, they can actually get out of these contracts if they find themselves in one that they were not disclosed that they had entered into.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Oliver, I think that's all the questions I had for you today. Thank you for joining me and sharing your experience and insight. Like we said, wholesaling's been quite the issue here in Ohio and other states as well. But your perspective really kind of helps see what's going on, as a realtor, and how homeowners can best protect themselves. And like I said, this law is taking effect in March, and education and awareness is going to be key for homeowners, and knowing kind of what red flags to look for. I know you mentioned some of the messaging they use and how pushy they are, and that can kind of make all the difference. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're most welcome. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to include kind of additional resources in the show notes if you'd like to learn more about Senate 155. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.